Welcome to week 7. All right, welcome to week 7 of Evolution Is. Who knew there was this much to say about evolution, right? Let me remind you again, evolution is the belief that all living organisms have a single common ancestor which itself came from non-living matter. The last 4 weeks before this one, I've been talking about the fact that evolution is unscientific. Here are some of the ways in which it's unscientific. We spent an entire week talking about the fact that evolution has no mechanism. That is a big deal. It is truly a big deal. Secondly, evolution cannot give a scientific explanation for the origin of any biological novelty. Instead, it relies on just-so stories and mysticism. And then last week, we started looking at how evolution is defended. I think you can tell a lot about any point of view on anything by looking to see how the people that believe it defend that point of view. So we see that when evolution is defended, first of all, one of the common things that is done is that there are very inflated claims that are made about evolution. A lot of times later on, those claims are found out to be inflated or in fact not even true, but that's after the damage is done, and there are lots of examples of that. But the most obvious thing, I think, here is the fossil record. Any unbiased view of the fossil record, if you truly looked at it with an unbiased eye, you would see that there's no way that this is something that is evidence for a a progressive view of evolution, the gradualistic view of evolution. And yet, in most textbooks, you'll see some paragraph or two paragraphs that claim that the fossil record is support for evolution. It can't be. Keep in mind that 95 to 99% of all living things that have ever lived on the face of the earth, according to evolutionists, we do not have fossils for. And that means that there's no way that the fossil record can be a good support for what they're saying. The second way that evolutionists defend it is they simply reject all criticism. They pretend as if there is no criticism. They'll make claims that there's no criticism because there aren't any criticisms to actually make. There is no scientific criticism. Well, as we've seen, that's not true, but that is a claim that is regularly made. So when the criticism does come, they pretty much just put their fingers in their ears and pretend that it doesn't exist. At some point, though, the criticism gets loud enough that they cannot ignore it anymore. And at that point, we get to the last defense here, and that is attacking. They go on the attack. Now, there's a phrase here that you might be familiar with. It's called ad hominem. That's a Latin phrase that means toward the person. And so an ad hominem attack is when somebody comes with a message you don't like to hear, and instead of arguing against the message, you attack the messenger. And that is actually a very common thing for people to do when their particular view on something is under attack. They attack in response by attacking the messenger instead of the message. Generally, in the past, this has been recognized as a completely unscientific and irrational approach to criticism. It used to be in America and other places that if you were having an argument with somebody, the first person that resorted to name calling, it was universally recognized that you just lost the argument. That's not really the case anymore in the United States. Some people go immediately to name calling, and I think this has just gotten worse from the evolution side in the last, it's probably the last 30 years. It's just gotten worse and worse. So let me show you some examples of what I'm talking about. Daniel Dennett is a philosopher. He says this: "The kindly God who fashioned each and every one of us, all creatures great and small, and sprinkled the sky with shining stars for our delight, that God is, like Santa Claus, a myth of childhood, not anything a sane, undiluted adult would literally believe in." Okay, so he's not a scientist. Would a scientist say something like this? Oh, surely not. He is a philosopher, but he doesn't argue against people that believe that God fashioned each and every one of us. He doesn't argue against people that argue that God put the stars in the sky. He simply says they're not sane and they're deluded. That's what he's saying. It's just an attack right on the message that he doesn't like. Now, surely a scientist wouldn't do this, right? Well, you know that's not true. Ernst Mayr, I actually showed you this quote before. He's considered one of the grandfathers of evolutionary theory. He's passed away now, but he wrote this: "No educated person today any longer questions the validity of the so-called theory of evolution, which we now know to be a simple fact." Now, if you think about that, clearly he knew educated people that he knew did not believe in evolution. I mean, clearly he did, and yet he made a statement like this. I think when you see statements like this tells you far more about Ernst Mayr than it does about the people that he was talking about. It tells you about his biases and his bigotedness. It tells you that he doesn't consider a person to be educated if they don't believe in evolution, even if they are educated, even if they have plenty of degrees. Doesn't matter to him. You can always count on Richard Dawkins to have a good fiery quote. And here's a quote from him: "There is only one game in town as far as serious science is concerned. It's not that there are two different theories. No serious scientist doubts that we are cousins of gorillas. We are cousins of monkeys. We are cousins of snails. We are cousins of earthworms." I speak for yourself. "We have shared ancestors with all animals and all plants. There is no serious scientist who doubts that evolution is a fact." See what he's done here? Did you catch one word that he put in here over and over? Serious. right? He knows that there are thousands, tens of thousands of scientists that do not believe in evolution. He's well aware of this. He's not stupid. But what this tells us is about Richard Dawkins. It tells us that Richard Dawkins is saying, I will not consider anybody like that a serious scientist. It doesn't tell us about those scientists. It tells us about Richard. Now, Scientific America is a pretty good scientific magazine. But occasionally they'll come out with an April Fool's Day issue, or sometimes they'll just do a cover, April Fool's Day cover. And a few years ago, this was their cover for their April Fool's Day issue. A balanced debate: is the Earth flat? The myth of the atom. Let's just ignore carbon dioxide. Reason schmeezen. And then up at the very top, 15 good points by creationists. They are not interested in discussing the message of the creationists. They're simply interested in attacking the messengers. And that's pretty common. And this is from a science group. And again, scientists should know better, but they don't care. Esquire magazine had an article. This was the cover, on the cover of the magazine. This was November 2005, Creationists and Other Idiots. If you went to the article, it said, greetings from Idiot America, and then he listed a whole bunch of people he doesn't like, and the first group he listed were creationists. Lots and lots of it. There's so many examples of this. I had to cut it down just so you didn't get too pulled down by this whole thing. But foes of evolution have set their sights on a new target, gravity. Yeah, no, they haven't. Creationists want to challenge the teaching of water's freezing point. No, they don't. So much for today's biology lesson on intelligent design, turning now to the subject of intelligent geography, flat Earth. Darwin is dumb. I mean, creationists can't even spell. They're just not very smart people. Here is a doctor. Apparently, he's reading the Bible in surgery. The patient is awake, which that's probably not a good idea for surgery. But the patient is saying this. I'm confused by this comic. Can I get a doctor not educated in fundamentalist-controlled public schools? Can anybody tell me where you would go where you would have fundamentalist-controlled public schools? Because I am totally unaware of where any of those schools would be. I don't know. Oh, they found the missing link. See that right there? Apparently it's me. It's not a bad representation, is it? Okay. Niles Eldredge says this: the intolerance for other people's views reduces this parlous little culture war down to a fight to have a purely right-wing Christian nation, where everyone speaks English, is free to tote a gun, and maybe preferably is Caucasian. This is stupid, hurtful little political battle. This creationist stuff, having lost its last vestiges of intellectual content not long after 1859. Do you think he sees the irony in his own quote? Because he's accusing creationists of being what? Intolerant. And the whole rest of this quote and the whole article actually just drips. Doesn't drips, it flows rapidly with intolerance. And he doesn't even see this, or probably doesn't even see it. And one more quote from Richard Dawkins. It is absolutely safe to say that if you meet someone who claims not to believe in evolution, let me stop right here. I claim to not believe in evolution, just so that's clear. That person, so he's now talking about me, is either ignorant, stupid, or insane, or wicked, but I'd rather not consider this. Now, that's pretty over the top, right? I mean, that is, and everybody can see it. In fact, when Richard Dawkins said this, he got criticism from even from his own side. They're like, Richard, come on. I mean, that is over the top. Don't say things like this. And so eventually, it took a while, but eventually he apologized. But if you read his apology, in the apology, his tone changed partway through the apology, and this was the end of his apology. Of course, it sounds arrogant, and that was one of the things even the evolutionists were saying. Richard, you're coming across as incredibly arrogant. He says, well, it sounds arrogant, But undisguised clarity is easily mistaken for arrogance. Examine this statement carefully, and it turns out to be moderate, almost self-evidently true. My arrogant and intolerant statement turns out to be nothing but simple truth. So much for the apology, right? It started as an apology, but it ended up not an apology. Now, I don't really feel like I have to do this just to show you that those statements that you just saw were completely ridiculous. But I'm going to anyway, because, when somebody says no intelligent person believes that evolution is false, no rational person believes that, no logical person, no educated person, no scientist, no serious scientist, it really only takes one counterexample to show that they're wrong. Right? So I could have picked any one of thousands of counterexamples, but I chose this one. You probably have heard of Dr. Benjamin Carson. Benjamin Carson was the chief of pediatric neurosurgery at Johns Hopkins University Medical School. He rose to fame. He was actually the head of the school already, but he really rose to fame in 1987 when he supervised surgery separating twins that were connected at the neck and the head. It was they had to have a whole crew in there. There were several surgeons working at the same time, and he was the head of the entire thing. And that's when he first became visible in the public eye. Man is a genius. He was given the 2008 Presidential Medal for Honor, Medal of Honor winner, which is the highest civilian award in the United States. And if you've never heard of him before, he's run for president. And in the last administration, he was the U.S. Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. Okay, I would go out on a limb here and say he's an educated person. He's a serious scientist. I know I'm going on a limb, but I'm willing to go there. Okay, here's what he has said. 150 years after Darwin, there is still no evidence for evolution. He's not just saying evolution is wrong. Right? Look at what he's saying. He says there is no scientific evidence. There's a little bit of circumstantial evidence, and from that, you just fly to all this other stuff. And so we do have somebody here that clearly is a contradiction to all those other statements that I had. Why would evolutionists do this? And they don't all do it, but some of the leadership in the evolution community, why would they do this? Why would they just attack the messengers? They're not arguing the message. They're just attacking the messenger. Why would you do that? Have you ever read the story of the emperor's new clothes? Okay. I think the reason that they do this is it's effective. If you know anything about this story, there's an emperor who is very vain, and he has some tailors come in, and they say, we're going to make you the best clothes ever. No one has ever made better clothes. They're so special. If you can't see these clothes, you're stupid. Only smart people will be able to see these clothes. So they pretend to make clothes, and they go through all the arm movements and things to be making these clothes, but they're not making anything. And then they finally put the clothes on the emperor, and everybody, all his advisors tell him how nice he looks, and then he goes parading through town, and everybody in town says, why, he has the nicest clothes. And then finally a little boy says, he's not wearing anything. And then everybody goes, oh, yeah, he's not. But why was everybody so willing to say that the emperor had clothes on? Because nobody wanted to be called stupid, right? If you didn't see the clothes, you were stupid, so everybody pretended that they saw the clothes. And I think that's why these attacks are used. They know they're not scientific to use attacks like this. They know that it is these are ad hominem attacks, but it's effective. There are a lot of people, particularly I would say college students, that do not want anyone to think that they're stupid. And if you argue against evolution, or even make a little statement that might be seen as being against evolution, people are going to say that you're stupid. And if you don't want that, then you're just going to toe the line. So I think that's the reason. So evolution is defended by making inflated claims, rejecting criticism, and attacking others. I thought at this point that what I would do is tell you a little bit about my own experiences with criticism. And So I hopefully this will be enlightening to you a little bit, because you'll probably experience some criticism if you talk to people about this. And also, hopefully you'll give you a little bit of insight on maybe how to respond to some of these things. So I'm not saying I always respond right, and I probably haven't always responded correctly, but sometimes I have. So I'll give you a little bit of background. Many years ago at my school, one of the other math teachers came to me and said he wanted to start a creation club. And he asked me if I wanted to, be one of the sponsors with him. And I said, yeah, I'll be a sponsor for that. So we formed a club. And what we decided is we would have monthly meetings. And what we would do is we would have a speaker come in each month and speak to us. And we really wanted to have this to be an open dialogue between people that believed in evolution and didn't. And so we thought we'll have the speakers alternate. We'll have a creationist speaker come in, we'll have an evolution speaker comes in, and then we'll just go back and forth and back and forth. It turned out we had a very difficult time getting speakers for the evolution point of view. I believe in like a year and a half, I think we had 8 speakers speak in support of creation, and I think we had 2 speakers. Maybe there might have been a third one, I can't remember. I think it was 2 speakers that spoke for evolution. And one of those speakers, he came in. His title was evolutionary biologist. He came in and he gave a talk to the group. And I don't remember. Of course, keep in mind I didn't agree with him, right? So I just remember it wasn't a particularly really good talk in my point of view. I remember thinking I could do a better job if I was arguing the evolution argument. But in particular, what struck me is he talked almost not at all about science. And what he did is he talked a lot about analogies. I remember this. He put a picture of a pool table up on a slide, and he talked about that pool table for 20 minutes at least. Now, if you want to know what that was all about, you can come and talk to me later on, but it doesn't really matter. Here's the point that I want to make. It really wasn't science he was talking about. He was just making an analogy about things. And so, talk was over, and I promptly forgot about it. About a week later, the other sponsor came to my office and he said, "You want to go to a talk tonight at the library?" And I said, "No, not really. Why?" And he said, "Well, the guy that came and spoke to us last week is going to be speaking at the library. And he's going to be speaking about how he gave a talk to a creation group, to a skeptic organization." And I said, "Yeah, I'll go to that." So we went to this talk. We didn't even go together. We arrived at different times and we sat on different sides of the room. Now, this was the most interesting talk I've ever been to, because this organization, I don't know how many members they had, but they didn't have too many that would come to talks, probably about 10 people. So there was not a lot of people in the room. And so this guy comes in just before he's supposed to start speaking, and he looks over and he sees this one math guy on the one side of the room, and his eyes got big. And then he looked over and saw me on the other side of the room, his eyes got bigger. And then, I don't know, it was the craziest thing I've ever seen. He picked up his first slide and he threw it against the wall. And then he the presentation did not go well. Let me just be charitable. All right. He dropped slides. He continually picked up a slide and looked at it and just put it on the ground. At the end, he bundled up all his slides and he just walked out the door. No questions, nothing, just walked right out. And I got to the point I started feeling bad for him. That's how bad it was. I think, looking back on it, that he was expecting to come and speak to the choir. He was not expecting anything at all other than, I'll come in, I'll speak real quick. I don't think he prepared at all for this presentation. And so afterwards, I went up to the guy that was the head of the skeptic organization. I said, "That wasn't a very good talk." And he said, "No," he said, he's not a real good speaker. And I thought later on, the guy's a professor. We speak for a living. He's supposed to be a professor of evolutionary biology. He should be able to speak off the cuff for hours about that. I could speak for hours about mathematics easily. And so that's not really a good, excuse. So while I was there having this discussion with the head of the skeptic organization, I said, the problem with you guys is you're not really skeptics. I mean, if you were truly skeptics, you would have been skeptical of a lot of the things he just said. I mean, he made some pretty amazing claims, I might say outrageous claims, and you just sat there and shook your head, right? Nobody asked him anything about that. If you're truly skeptics, I think you'd be skeptical about some of the things that he said. And then I said, and this just came to me just in a flash, how about if I come and speak to your organization and I talk to you about, I just made the title up on the spot, The Unscientific Nature of Evolution. I'll explain why you as a skeptic group should be skeptical of evolution. And he said, that might be interesting. I said, great. I gave him my email address. I went home that evening and I started preparing a presentation. About 2 weeks later, I hadn't heard from him, so I sent him an email. He said, the executive committee hasn't met yet. Okay. Waited a few more weeks. I hadn't heard from him, so I contacted him back. And he finally sent me an email, and it said, we have decided not to have you come. That was the whole email. I was like, So I sent back, why not? And he said, well, you could say anything up there, and we wouldn't necessarily be prepared to rebut you. And so we're not going to give you a platform. But what we will do is we'll let you write a 2-page article about whatever you want, and we'll put it in our little newsletter. But we're going to tell you right now, we're going to then put a rebuttal after yours in our newsletter. Well, at this point, I've got an entire presentation ready, and 2 pages is, I could have gone on for 20 pages, and they're going to give me 2 pages, and I'm thinking, no, I'm not doing that. Besides, if I turn it over to them, I'm not saying they would edit it, but I wouldn't have any control over them editing and put anything they wanted in there and put it under my name. So I said, no, I'd rather not do that, and I just kind of left it there, they thought. But what I did is I went to the library, and I found out the next time they were meeting, and I found out what room they were meeting in, and then I reserved the room next to their room. It was a big room. They had a little tiny room, I had a real big room. And I said, I'm just going to come in and give a presentation. Okay, no problem. And so I asked, I did a little bit of advertising. Some of you might have actually been there for that presentation. So it was interesting. The night comes for my presentation, and I figured I'm just going to do the presentation right next door to them. See how curious they are. Well, they come in for their meeting, and all these people are coming in, streaming into the library, and they're like, what's going on? And they look in the room, and I'm up there in the front. They canceled their meeting, and they came to my presentation, which is exactly what I wanted them to do. And so I was able to give this in presentation about the unscientific nature of evolution. So it went very well. There was question and answer period at the end, and that went, I thought, very, very well as well. And so about a month later, they, in their little newsletter, which they put online, they put a review of my presentation. And it was written by somebody who's local who has a PhD in biology. And so I was really curious about what they would have to say about my talk. And I read the review, and I was like, the review was just a terrible review. It was the most distorted thing I think I've ever read in my life. I have the review somewhere, and I went to looking for it yesterday. I couldn't find it. But maybe I don't ever even want to read it again because it was so depressing. I had spent all this time and effort making up this presentation specifically for these guys. And from this review, you would think that it was the most chaotic, disorganized mess anybody had ever heard. You would think that it was confusing, that it was, just a really bad presentation. Now, I was angry. I'm thinking, anybody that was there will know this is garbage, really. And in fact, even the people from his group that were there would know that's not really what happened. But he wasn't writing for them. He wasn't writing for people that were there. He was writing for other people. He was basically saying, nothing to see here. Don't worry about it. Nothing to see here. That's what he was doing. And so I wrote a review of his review. I got my paper, and I wrote it. I printed it out, and then I read it. I may have had my wife read it. And then I had crumbled it up, and I threw it in the trash. It was probably cathartic to do that, but I should not send that out to anybody. Okay, I was responding to unfair criticism with, even if it's fair criticism, still not right. And so I sat back and I said, okay, now the purpose here is not to win the debate. And that's really important to remember. All right, people that believe in evolution are not stupid. They're not uneducated. They're blind. And so my goal was to, even a little bit, try to open some eyes. That's my goal. And so I thought, I want to respond to this in a way that's fair. You know, when he makes claims and distortions that are completely unfair, I want to kind of say, okay, that's not fair. But I also wanted to ask questions. And so what I did is I'm going to read to you the review of his review, the letter that I sent back to him. I've never read this to anybody, but I'm going to read it to you today because maybe it'll give you some insight in how to deal with other people. I did go through and review my presentation point by point by point with them to show that it was organized. It wasn't a chaotic mess. And then I asked, I didn't count the questions, but at least 50 questions. And I asked them this, and why did I do that? Asking questions is probably the single best thing that you can do. Because what you're doing is you're getting them to recognize that they cannot answer your questions. They either cannot or they will not answer your questions. And both of those are important for them to recognize. My own personal experience is not one person in 100 who believes in evolution can credibly defend it. Not one in 100. And this guy has a PhD in biology, and he couldn't. So what I did is when I first made the presentation, I went to their website, and I was going through, and they're skeptical of everything, supposedly. And so they have an article on the website which is called The 5 Laws of Quack Science. And so I thought, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take the 5 laws of quack science. This is their article. I'm going to apply them to evolution. This is where they refuse to do it. I'm going to do it for them. So the 5 laws are these: think big, think difficult, the rule of paranoia and hysteria, no criticism allowed, and the lonely hero of the laboratory. So these are all fleshed out in the article, but give you some idea what the 5 points are. And in this article, he says, look, if something satisfies one of these, that doesn't make it a pseudoscience. But the more things that are satisfied, the more things that a particular idea satisfies, the more of this checklist, the more likely you're dealing with something that's quack science or pseudoscience. So I said, okay, we'll see. So I did change the last one because lonely hero of the laboratory does not really apply to evolutionists at all. And I changed it to the intimidating hero in the classroom. And I did. And I said that I was going to do that in the presentation. And I didn't count this one in my count because I did change it. But that last one clearly does apply. And it is a scientific argument against evolution. It certainly does apply to evolution. But I didn't count that one. So here is my count that I came up with. At the end of my presentation, I said, okay, well, clearly 1, 2, 3, a little bit, at least for some of the leaders. 4, absolutely no question. And 5, the changed version certainly applies, but in the version that was in your article, certainly not. But I'm counting like 4 here of the 5. It seems like a skeptic who believes in the 5 laws of quack science should, seeing this, should recognize that maybe they should be skeptical of evolution. That was kind of the point, and I fleshed out all my points as I went. Okay, so I'm going to read this to you. You'll recognize some of the arguments that I'm talking about because I use some of them in this thing. Some of the things you maybe won't recognize, and that's okay. But just listen to, I think, the tone. I was trying to present truth. And when you do that, you're going to step on some people's toes sometimes, but I wasn't doing that purposefully. I wasn't trying to do that. This is not an ignorant person. This is a brilliant person who needs to see and recognize that what he thinks is true is not really true, or that he doesn't have the support for what he believes that he thinks he does. So here you go. I read with great interest your review of the talk I gave in December on the unscientific nature of evolution. My talk was never meant to be a point-by-point rebuttal of the inferential evidences for macroevolution. As I'm sure you are aware, all evidence for macroevolution is inferential. I was prepared to do that if necessary in the question and answer session at the end, but no serious defense of evolution was ever offered. The point of my talk was to demonstrate to a skeptic that there were many unscientific aspects to the theory of evolution. Here is a summary of my presentation and some questions I have about your review. I applied the skeptic's 5 laws of quack science to evolution. Law number 1, think big. We agree that evolution is a big idea. Law number 2, think difficult. At this point in your review, you appear to be very unclear as to what I was trying to say. This is a quote. I think his point here was about presenting one explanation as being difficult to understand, abstruse, only for the initiated, so he said yes, I guess, unquote. I'm sorry that you thought I was confusing at this point. I started by noting that evolutionists obscure the nature of this debate by defining evolution in different ways. This allows them to present evidence of small-scale change and claim that it is sufficient to prove large-scale change. I explained that this does not follow logically. I showed that because of oscillation and natural limits, we cannot assume that small changes must add up to big changes. This was a major point in my talk. Do you agree or disagree with this point? In the light of this fact, and the fact that big evolutionary changes cannot be observed, that's part of law number 2, and cannot be experimentally duplicated, it is clear that macroevolution has taken on faith. Your response? I challenged evolutionists to demonstrate the creative powers of natural selection by creating life, creating DNA, creating a nucleus, etc. You did not mention this in your review. Do you think this challenge is unreasonable? If so, why? I pointed out that the details of big changes have to be imagined. This is routinely omitted in biological textbooks and scientific papers. Do you think that imagination should be on par with observation or actual experimental evidence? These imaginative stories, I gave several examples, are apparently difficult to verify. Remember law number 2? Because none of them have been. Do you think this hand-waving belongs in biology textbooks? Why? Evolutionists constantly tell me that they may be able to do some of these tasks someday. Law number 2 says the effect is just beyond the reach of current scientific technology. Why do you conclude that, quote, of course none of this applies to evolution, unquote? Clearly it does. If you were honest with your readers, you would have grudgingly admitted that I had several valid points in this section. Law number 3. Since my talk was 80 minutes long, I did not have time to go into detail about the paranoia associated with the Kansas situation. The paper I brought summed the situation up well. Did you get a copy? I did say that I did not believe that all evolutionists were paranoid, but I gave quotes from Dawkins, Shermer, Eldridge, and Scott that showed that evolution leaders certainly make paranoid statements. Do you agree that these statements demonstrate paranoia? Do you agree with these statements? You didn't tell us. Instead, you ended the section by saying this rule applies to people like me. Quote, here is a math teacher attacking all of biology, geography, astronomy, genetics, and various other sciences, unquote. Now, before I read this statement, I would not have said that law number 3 applied to you. Now I'm not so sure. Can't you see that a statement of such obvious distortion and exaggeration is itself an example of paranoia? What is the relevance of the fact that I am a math teacher? Are only scientists allowed to critique this big idea? If you think so, then aren't you unscientifically arguing by authority? Second of all, I was not attacking all of biology. On the contrary, I used biology in my presentation to effectively attack the aspect of evolution known as common descent. I would love to hear your explanation of how the organelles in the eukaryotic cell evolved from a prokaryotic cell. As you may be aware, this summer, noted evolutionist and origin of life researcher Carl Woese rejected common descent as well. He now believes that all living things evolved from a large number of pre-cells instead of one primordial protocell. Does law number 3 apply to him as well? Why geography is in this list, I cannot guess. I think he meant geology, but he said geography. I enjoy astronomy, but that was not even mentioned in this talk. I do not attack genetics, which is the most mathematical part of biology, except for the absolutely unsupported idea that the intricacy of DNA can somehow be miraculously created by the processes of natural selection and mutation. This is quite a broad brush statement about me, and it is simply not true. Law number 4, no criticism of loud. Of all the quack laws that apply to evolution, this one is most obviously true. It seems to me that even you realize this is so. Quote, while it would be interesting to look at these in more detail, unquote. The truth is that evolutionists do not tolerate criticism of their pet theory. Do you approve of biology teachers being denied tenure because they admit they do not believe in evolution? Do you approve of the evolution TV program rejecting the offer of scientists to present an opposing point of view? Do you approve of schools writing the biology curriculum in such a way that no criticism of evolution can even be mentioned in the classroom? Do you approve of a school refusing even to allow a teacher to tell students that the Haeckel diagrams found in their biology textbooks are known frauds? Do you approve of science journals that do not publish letters to the editor from scientists that disagree with evolution? Do you approve of journals which rescind offers to print scientific papers against evolution after a fuss is made by evolutionists? I have examples of these and many more. Is this type of censorship okay because it is for the greater good? Perhaps your answer to these questions is yes, and you do not want to admit that in print. Since you are a biologist, I really do want to know your opinion on whether or not evolution should be open to criticism, but your opinion on this was not offered in your review. You attempted to turn this law against me by implying that I did not write an article for your newsletter to avoid close examination of my ideas. If I feared close examination of my ideas, I would keep them to myself and not present them to a large group in a public forum. I did not write an article for your newsletter because the problems with evolution run far deeper than can be expressed in 2 pages. I also decided I could reach a much bigger audience with a presentation than with a short article buried in your newsletter. Law number 5. I did not include this law in my count because I changed it. I changed it so that I could talk about another unscientific aspect of evolution, arguing from authority. The most effective argument for evolution is the often repeated claim that all scientists, all biologists, all intelligent people believe in evolution, unquote. This claim is effective. Many people I've met have no other reason for why they believe in evolution, but is both unscientific and false. To demonstrate the claim was unscientific, I showed that statements like this are clearly rejected in the California science framework. Do you think claims of this nature have any place in a science classroom? If so, why? To demonstrate that the claim is false, I pointed out that many scientists reject evolution. I had one list of 100 scientists that disagree with evolution with me at the talk, along with their credentials. I would have been glad to give you the list if you had just asked for it. I still can if you want it. I also had a list of scientists from Springfield that reject evolution. Yes, my list included doctors, nurses, engineers, and mathematicians. You found their occupations, quote, interesting. Is this another subtle argument by authority? That is, only the opinions of people that you consider to have the proper credentials matter? My list also included biologists and physicists. Is there a reason you did not include that information in your review? I concluded that evolution was not science. Instead, I said it was a secular religion. Do you approve or disapprove of the Darwin fish? I like the Darwin fish because it clearly demonstrates the religious feelings of many evolutionists. Throughout my talk, I gave many examples of aspects of evolution which must be taken by faith. At this point, I gave several different examples. I have an article entitled, "Can Genetic Research Help Us to Develop a Picture of Extinct Creatures That Left No Fossils?" Would you agree or disagree that the existence of such creatures has to be taken by faith? I showed from a current widely used biology textbook how, this is a quote from the textbook, "A random change is not likely to improve the genome any more than blindly firing a gunshot through the hood of a car is likely to improve engine performance," unquote. Do you agree with the next sentence in the textbook that starts with, quote, "On rare occasions, however"? Do you agree that this is an act of faith? In my conclusion, I was simply agreeing with a well-known evolutionist, Michael Roos, that evolution was a secular religion. I used a very long quote and gave the source because I did not want anyone to argue that I took it out of context. Do you disagree with Michael Roos? I assume you disagree with us, but you did not tell your readers that what Michael Roos believes and why you disagree. That is a summary of my presentation. Your review tries to paint my presentation as somewhat confusing and a weak attempt to force the quack laws of science on evolution. But from the reaction of the audience members to my talk, I know otherwise. I would like to thank you for some of the kind comments in your review. Quote, "The performance was enthusiastic and slick with good graphics. He seems to be energetic, committed, and effective at reaching people and getting them out," unquote. But I feel that being accurate is more important than being entertaining. You must not think I was accurate because you wrote that, quote, "Some people were probably bamboozled." Can you tell me what you mean by that? Do you have specific examples of errors in my presentation? Since you yourself agreed during the question period that evolution does have problems with it, I believe I succeeded in my objective to demonstrate that there are many reasons for a skeptic to be skeptical of evolution. So how exactly were people bamboozled? In my opinion, your review does not address the problems or answers the challenges which I gave to evolution. If you want to rebut me, you are going to have to forget about the, quote, ministers, priests, rabbis, unquote. Instead, you are eventually going to have to answer these questions. Okay. So that was my talk. I have been told I am an idiot. I have been told that I am a charlatan. I've been told I'm a deceiver. I am told that I am a bamboozler. And those are the words that I'm willing to say out loud. The one I think that bothered me the most was the person who called me an idiot. It was the day after I just done a presentation at school. I was walking down a hallway, and all of a sudden a professor stepped in front of me, and right in front, so it stopped me. So I couldn't, and I wasn't even looking up. So I looked up. He put his finger in my face, and he said, "You are an idiot." And then he stepped around me real quick and took off down the hall. And I thought, wow, that was rude. I didn't really, I couldn't tell where this was coming from. Up to that point, I had never had a conversation with that person before, ever. And it had to do with the presentation, but here's the thing, he wasn't at the presentation. Right? He just heard about the presentation from somebody else, and it really riled him up. And so he felt like he needed to say this. This is a person, they're not in science, professor, but they're not in science, they're not in math. This is a person who couldn't argue with me about evolution for 5 minutes. Seriously could not. Why would they feel comfortable in doing something like that? I think the answer is all those other quotes that I gave you earlier. If you grew up in an environment where every educated person that you knew, every smart person you knew, was always saying anybody that believes in doesn't believe in evolution is an uneducated, bigoted, fool or insane or whatever. If that's all you're ever fed, then that is where you're going to come from, and that's where this person came from. So anyway, I don't say that I always handle the situations expertly, but it's very, very important if you're going to have a discussion with somebody else that you remember that these are people that whose arguments are wrong. Maybe the message is wrong, but don't attack the messenger. Don't do the very thing that they're doing. So again, you can point out when an argument is wrong, and sometimes somebody is going to take offense at that because they've really internalized the viewpoints. And so when you attack the viewpoint, they're going to take that as and you can't do much about that, but don't make that your purpose. Don't make that your goal. The goal is to convince somebody that they don't really know what they say they know or what they think they know, and get them to begin thinking about it. And so that was the purpose of the letter that I wrote. I sat down next to this person in the next skeptic meeting, and then I kind of pushed it over, and it was in a sealed envelope. And so he unsealed it, and he spent the rest of the meeting reading my letter. He never responded to me, never talked to me. I've only seen him like 2 or 3 times since then, and when he sees me, he runs the other direction about as fast as he can. But honestly, I feel like I got somewhere with him because I just pointed out, look, this was not, I think it's fair to point out when something's a distortion. So anyway, I think we are done for the week, and hopefully I will finish next week. So thank you again.